My name is Margot Lee Shetterly. I'm the author of the book Hidden Figures, which tells the story, true story, this is not fiction, of the African-American women who worked as mathematicians starting in World War II and going through the space race. One of the women, in fact, the very first woman whose story I tell in the book is Dorothy Johnson Vaughan, who, in addition to being an amazing mathematician, had the distinction of being the very first black supervisor in the organization that became NASA. She was the head of the segregated West Computers unit. She supervised a room full of black female mathematicians, also brilliant women. And she nurtured the careers of so many people, including two of the other women that I write about in the book, Mary Jackson and Katherine Johnson, who is very well known for having calculated trajectories for the Mercury astronauts, and who last year received the Presidential Medal of Freedom. So while Mrs. Johnson's name has been known for some decades, Mrs. Vaughan's name was lost to history, and so finding her and finding about her has been one of the great privileges of my life. But one of the things that I had to realize is that a book and a movie are different vehicles, and the kind of thing that people want out of a book and what they want out of 2 hours in a movie are very different. And so I didn't write the screenplay, but the screenwriters made what I thought was a good decision, which is they cannot tell 30 years of history and keep people interested in the movie. So they made the decision to focus on the iconic moment with Mrs. Johnson, where John Glenn is getting ready to go up into space, this orbital flight, which is a transformative moment in the Cold War between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. And he says, get the girl to do it, get the girl, which is what they called all of the women, not just the black women. All of the women were girls. They were computers. Get the girl to check the numbers. And that's one of, as one of his pre-flight checklists. If she says they're good, I'm good to go. That was Mrs. Johnson's big moment. It's a very exciting moment. It's a very cinematic moment. So, I totally understand the decision to make that focus. I just hope that people will read the book, because there are so many things that show the entire progression, from these first women. So your grandmother showed up in December of 1943, and there were actually, as best I can tell, about 15, 16 other women who were there. The first women came that year, 1943, and they were really the ones who broke the ceiling for the other ones to follow. So, and then the end of the book, I focus on the story of Christine Johnson. She's the one who got to the top. She stood on all the shoulders of the women who came before, and she lived up to their promise and to her promise. So I am so excited about the movie because it means that this story is never going back into the shadows. But I hope people will read the book to get the fullness of all of these women. And I love your grandmother, what she stood for, what she did for all of these women, and what she has given to me, even though I never met her.
Equilateral, isosceles, tetrahedron.
I've never seen a mind like the one your daughter has. You have to see what she becomes.
Come on! Move like that.
Hey, Catherine! We all gonna end up unemployed riding around in this pile of junk.
You're welcome to walk the 16 miles.
Or sit in the back of the bus.
You kiss me up.
You have identification number?
We're just on our way to work at NASA, sir.
I had no idea they hired.
There are quite a few women working in the space program.
You know what we're doing here? We're putting a human on top of a missile, shooting him into space. It's never been done before. I need a mathematician that can look beyond the numbers. Math that doesn't yet exist.
You have someone?
Running what I'm playing.
Catherine's the gal for that. She can handle any numbers you put in front of her.
You're a computer at NASA. You let women handle that sort of...
Oh, left,
Yes, they let women do some things at NASA, Mr. Johnson. And it's not because we wear skirts. It's because we wear glasses.
You've been gone for 300 hours.
Was Mama gone for 12 and a half days?
No, but it felt like it.
In 14 days, astronauts will be here for training. Everything we do can matter to their wives, to their children. I believe it's going to matter to the whole country.
My gals are ready.
There's no protocol for women attending.
There's no protocol for a man circling the Earth either, sir.
We all get there together, we don't get there at all.
Let me ask you, if you were a white male, would you wish to be an engineer?
I wouldn't have to. I'd already be one.
Don't you know that we're able?
How far back can you trace your family?
I can trace it back to my mother's grandparents and my father's grandparents. Now, I did not know them, but we know who they are. My mother's grandfather owned her grandmother. They had 4 children, and he had 4 boys. The master sent them to college, and 2 of the girls went to Hampton Institute. And they said that they had a wonderful childhood. Now that's as far back as I can go on my mother's side. My mother's mother had a series of strokes when I was 2. She had come to White Sulphur every time my mother had a baby, and my mom had 4. But after I was born, she became ill, and she died when I was 16. And I can remember her being a semi-invalid during that whole time. My father's grandfather was a purebred Indian. We haven't yet been able to determine what tribe, but one of the cousins is working on it. Daddy's mother died. Well, I didn't know this. We didn't know his father either. His mother died when he was 9, but we knew his stepmother, and we called her Granny. And in later years, she lived on the same street that we lived on. And we'd go down and tell her we were hungry because she made such gorgeous pancakes.
It's an interesting mix of that you just described that I think a lot of young people today would have a hard time understanding, where you have a family made up of African Americans, of whites, of Indians. How were those relationships worked out? I mean, because the society did not see everyone as equal.
Oh, no. Well, my mother says that they thought a lot of the grandfather, and they called him Bra Abe. And his family, his white family was over here, and his black family was over here. And she knew her grandparents. Now, Daddy didn't know his grandparents. He never mentioned his grandmother. And we didn't know until we were grown that he was Indian, that his grandfather was an Indian. Nor did we know that Mama's grandfather was white, because they sort of were ashamed of their lineage. And we had to drag it out of them, and just did not know until I think we were in college when we found out.
Why were they ashamed?
I guess it was just one of those things. They did not brag about it. They didn't act ashamed, but they just did not talk about it, not a word, until we began asking questions, lots of questions.
tell me about what kind of folks your parents were. Tell me about, first of all, tell me about your mother.
Well, we thought she was the prettiest lady in the world. Her wedding picture, she had an 18-inch waist, and she was cute, and she was 5'2". My dad was 6 feet tall. We thought he was the tallest, handsomest man in the world. I was definitely a daddy's girl, and all of us had a very, very happy childhood.
How did the two of them meet?
She was in Danville, Virginia, and had poor health. She had them, they gave them a vaccination for diphtheria. Hers became infected, and she had a scar this big. And further, she was just in poor health. And they thought, they took her to West Virginia in the mountains, and her health would improve. So she went up there with a cousin. And Daddy was one of the dashing young bachelors of White Sulphur. He had a farm, and he bred horses, and he did lumber, and he had an orchard and all this thing. So he had a lovely farm.
This was in White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia,
yeah.
right? Mm-hmm.
He lived, the farm, of course, was out of the town. And he was a very popular bachelor, and she was a cute little 18-year-old girl. And they met there at the Greenbrier. Now, I don't know how many years it was before they married. It was not when she was 18, but that's when they met.
And how was it that he, as a black man, was able to acquire this land and this business and all the rest of it?
Well, he had four brothers, and this farm had been left them by their father, and all the boys left. All the boys, and there were 3 girls. They all left the farm, and Daddy maintained the farm. And I recall very well when he sold the farm. That was the year we came down to live in town so we could go to school. And when he sold the farm, the boys said, well, Josh, you've taken care of it all these years. And they would not take any money.
Wow, that's wonderful. Mm-hmm. That is wonderful. So your father came from a very close-knit family, obviously. Mm-hmm. He was very close to his brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
And did he ever talk about what it was like for him growing up in that area?
Just the fact that they interacted well with the whites that were around. They had no problem. Daddy said that the whites worked on his farm, and he worked, and everybody did everything together. And there was really no feeling of discrimination until he moved into town, and then the kids started going to school. And farmers are a different breed. And I guess that's where the differences came, because it always irked me that they called my daddy Josh or Uncle Josh. And so I called my white friend's father Charles, and it would upset him so much. But I said, well, he calls my daddy by his first name.
So the whites would not call him by his last name,
but they gave him utmost respect. And his children, and their daddy would tell us, now you are as good as anybody in this town, but you know better. And I remember that, and I usually use that expression whenever I make a talk to kids. You've got to learn this early, that you are as good as anybody else, but you know better than any of these people. So conduct yourselves accordingly. And I try to get mine brought up that same way.